all here. We're really proud to be part of this event. My name is Nicole Jacobs, and I'm the Chief Executive of Standing Together Against Domestic Violence. And if you don't know us, if you're not from the Triborough or you're new to the Triborough, we're a charity that sits in Hammersmith and Fulham, but works across the Triborough, really implementing the coordinated response to domestic abuse. So we've been around for about 18 years, and our founders created Standing Together, who are from the women's sector, from the statutory sector, from the community, who really wanted in this area to truly have an embedded, coherent approach to domestic abuse in all areas of work. So that is what Standing Together does. We coordinate your local MARACs. We have work that we do within acute hospital trust, community-based health services, social work. We have a children and health coordinator, a children and health operational group, which may be most relevant to folks in the room, and Victoria from our team, if you just want to raise your hand, if you want to try to speak to her today. We have housing operational work in the Triborough. We do criminal justice related work. We coordinate your specialist courts in Hammersmith and Westminster. And of course we're just starting a bit more work related to community-based work called the SAFE Project. So I wanted to give you a bit of a context of who we are and what we do here in the Triborough. We also sit as part of the Angelou Partnership, which largely are your frontline service providers. So anyone from the Angelou Partnership, could you raise your hand? Hi, I'm proud. So your Angelou partners are obviously frontline service providers in these boroughs, so it's really nice to see you all here too. Today is really exciting. We've been wanting for a while to have Professor Evan Stark and Emma Katz come and speak to the Triborough and share with you learning, and no better day than International Women's Day. I was given by somebody on the team some statistics about violence against women and girls, and I'm not going to share those because I did just hear Professor Stark speak yesterday at a conference, and trust me, we're going to have that covered in his presentation, so I won't say more than that. What we're going to do is have Professor Stark and Professor Katz speak to you. We'll have a short break, and then we'll have a panel for question and answers, and joining them will be Claire Chamberlain, who is our VOG Strategic Chair, our VOG Strategic Board Chair. So it's really nice to have her here, and also Megan Field, who's our strategic lead from the Triborough. So it'll be a great event. I know you don't have this in your pack, I think, so I'm going to read out to you a bit about Professor Stark and Emma Katz, so just you have a bit of context as to why we're so excited. But I think you are excited because this event's kind of sold out in about 30 minutes, actually, if you didn't know that. But Evan Stark is the founder of one of the first shelters for abused women in the U.S. He's a sociologist and forensic social worker, as well as a widely published author and award-winning researcher with an international reputation for his innovative work on legal, policy, and health dimensions of gender violence, including its effects on children. He has testified in numerous cases, including Nicholson and Williams, a path-breaking trial that ended the practice of removing children because their mother was abused. Professor Stark's award-winning book on coercive control was an important basis for the new offence of domestic violence and coercive control in England and Wales. He is an emeritus professor at Rutgers University in New Jersey, and has also held appointments at Yale University, the University of Essex, Bristol University, and most recently was the Liverpool visiting professor at the University of Edinburgh. Before I ask him to come up, I just also want to introduce Dr. Emma Katz, who has pioneered the approach of investigating how children are harmed by coercive control, not only physical violence, in domestic abuse cases. How children resist coercive control and what helps them to recover from it are also important strands of her research. Emma is a lecturer in childhood and youth at Liverpool Hope University. Her current responsibilities include being lead monitor and evaluator for the Survivors to Thrivers project in Liverpool, an academic advisor to Nottingham Independent Domestic Abuse Services. Her research into children and coercive control has recently been awarded Best Publication of the Year by WAVES, the Women Against Violence Europe. So amazing. And just to say thank you very much to the Triborough for supporting having this event this morning. A big thank you to Miranda from the Standing Together team who helped to organize, and to Jody Green, who obviously makes it all happen with so many of our events here. So I just wanted to say thank you to that. There's not a fire alarm today, so if we do hear one, it'll be the real thing, and we'll proceed out the front of the building and head towards the library. So with that done, I'll invite Professor Stark to come on up. Thank you.
Thanks, Nicole. In the States, the only people who could sit through 2.5 hours of talks that have gone to Catholic school. Okay, I'll work on this. Nicole and I yesterday were privileged, before I say good morning, we're privileged to be at a conference organized by Frank Mullane and Arda, which included 50 family members who had lost children or parents or somebody to coercive control and domestic violence. And it was a humbling experience, both reminding us why we do this work, but also the consequences for real people when we don't. I don't have any other real sort of asides, except the last, well, I won't tell you, we'll talk. So, this is Magdalena Ruszek. I don't know how many of you remember her. She was tried and convicted of, along with her live-in partner, Marius, of killing her son, Daniel. And excoriated in the press, including the Times, the Guardian, as well as the, shall we say, Murdoch press, less reputable press. The ways in which they attacked her were somewhat different. I think the Guardian and the Times attributed her bad behavior to poverty and coming from an immigrant background, and so forth, whereas the other papers just talked about her as cruel and evil, a killer mom and so forth. And they had pictures of her holding hands with Marius outside the courtroom. And I just want to put out, if you remember, the three things that really the judge relied on and seemed to be most condemning, most damning of Magdalena. The first was that, I'm sure you probably remember some of this, she had told the school not to give Daniel any more food. He was at that point going into bins and stealing cakes, taking lunch from some of the other children. And the judge excoriated her, and she would give him a little bit of cheese and some bread for lunch. And so she told the teacher and at the school never to let him eat anything but the bread and cheese that she gave him. And of course, one of the causes of his death, although he was beaten to death, was that he was starved. The second thing that the judge excoriated her for was that she hadn't reported the abuse, her own abuse. If she claimed it, he wasn't sure that it was real, let alone the abuse of Daniel, and in particular condemned her because several weeks, and I'm sure many of you remember this, before his death, they had visited a pediatrician. And here she was with the pediatrician, perfect time, what better time, to reveal both her own abuse and the horrible abuse that was taking place at home, where he was being tied to chairs, he was being beaten, he was being starved. Perfect time to reveal this abuse. and did not do so. And instead allowed the pediatrician to think there were all kinds of other explanations, obscure medical explanations, for the condition in which he found Daniel. We'll come back to Magdalena. Some of you may remember her suicide, which was more recent in prison, on Daniel's birthday, with a little note saying that it was the one thing she had left that she could do for him. This is Mrs. Nicholson. Now, you heard a little bit from Nicole about this case. I just want to introduce you to Charlene, who's American, but Charlene is a Jamaican woman from Jamaica who moved to Queens, New York. And one afternoon, while her son was still in school, that's a painting, by the way, that's not Charlene Nicholson. One afternoon while she was in school, while her son was in school, her husband, who was living in another state quite far away in North Carolina, came up to New York. He was jealous about something. He broke into the apartment. He broke her arm, and then he left. And we never heard from him again. He's out of the picture and disappears. Before she called the emergency help line, she called the neighbor, made sure that the neighbor could take the baby and also her son when he arrived home from school, and then called a cousin in the neighboring state of New Jersey and asked that she take the children while she was in the hospital until her arm was repaired. At that point only did she call, this is a very bad habit I have, I got from Donald Trump. He points all the time. But I feel when I do it like I'm the greatest. And you're the greatest. Having 1 million people in one room is not very good. Then, only then, did she call the emergency number and go to the hospital. That night, with guns drawn, police arrived at the neighbor's house and took the 2 children into care. She had told the nurse at the hospital about what had happened. The nurse had reported it to our august child protection system in New York City, and Charlene immediately signs herself out against medical advice, and it was over 2 weeks before she could find out where the children had been placed, let alone get the children returned with legal help. Several months passed, and we were able to identify 50 cases in which children had been removed under almost identical circumstances. There had been no actual harm to the children shown. The agency had moved in an emergency basis to remove the children and place them in foster care and to charge the children with neglect. And we brought a case in federal court against the city of New York for doing so, claiming that this was equivalent to indentured servitude, something which is abandoned slavery, something taking a child and putting them into another family. This is akin to slavery, we said, which is prohibited in the United States by the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution and various other amendments. And the trial lasted for months, and we'll talk a little bit about this. There were several dozen witnesses. I was the lead witness for the families, for the mothers. And the reason I was a witness was interesting. I had done some early work, which I'll talk about in a minute, research on domestic violence and child abuse, probably the first research in the United States that demonstrated the connection. But I was not an expert in this field by any stretch of the imagination, nothing approaching Dr. Katz's brilliant work on coercive control in children. But the reason I took the job was twofold. One was that no one else would. And the reason no one else in our movement to stop domestic violence wouldn't do it because they were afraid of alienating the child welfare system. And also they were afraid of something else. For many years, we had taken the position, or they had taken the position, that we weren't able to get enough sympathy simply by presenting the plight of women who were abused by their partners, and therefore it was much better, certainly for publicity reasons and to elicit public sympathy, to show the harms to children. Because surely people who didn't sympathize with the women would nonetheless come to our side if they saw how damaging this was to children. So on the one hand, we couldn't get any experts. They didn't want to risk this claim, because part of the essence of my case was that the harms to the children in this case could not be proved. And there was no justification based simply on the mother's, what the department called exposing herself to domestic violence, which meant that if she was choked, for example, she had participated in domestic violence. That as a result of, I was claiming that since children were not per se harmed in this, there certainly wasn't an emergency and probably not a basis for removal. The second reason why I took the case, ironically, and I say this because I feel caution even presenting to this audience, the department was using my research showing the connection between domestic violence and child maltreatment as the basis for removing children from the very women we had done the research to help understand and protect. And I say that with a caution because I worry that when we approach social work, when we approach child welfare, when we approach any organization whose statutory mission is primarily to protect children, not necessarily the other parents in the family, whether they be offending or non-offending parents, that any information we provide about the risks to children of certain kinds, I'm not Claire, I'm not looking at you because it just happened, but any information we provide about the dangers to children gets translated into even more punitive responses to women. So that's a risk that we're taking in presenting this information. And I mean that quite seriously. So part of what we're going to do is, and this may seem somewhat elementary to you if you had previous training, but we're going to question some of the taken for granted in the world in which we work. I'm a social worker too, by the way, I assume you know that. Exposed children are seriously harmed? Maybe yes, maybe not. We're going to challenge this, and I attribute this challenge in part to Emma, we're going to challenge the whole notion that exposure is a useful framework in which to understand what children are experiencing, but we'll come back to that. We're going to challenge the idea that women who stay are not protecting their children, using Emma's work and Marianne Hester's work and the work of many others. And the idea that we can keep children safe without protecting mom, or I would qualify that and say that there are better ways, if it's possible, to keep a child safe. I would challenge the idea that there are, per se, automatically better ways to keep children safe than leaving them with their mom, even if the mom is in an abusive relationship. And then, probably one of the most controversial points I intend to make is that the myth that you can't work with batterers. And I understand this, believe me. I have a private practice in my home where I do forensic work. I see most of my clients are women who murdered their husband, who murdered their children, and are accused of horrendous crimes. Some of them are men who have been abused. I don't meet the violent ones in my home. So how can we have social work, knowing a history of violence, to go out and work with these men without police going along and presence and what have you? And at least in the United States, social work spent generations trying to get away from the idea that child abuse, child maltreatment was a criminal event rather than an event that required services. And here we are saying the crazy people from the crazy feminists like me from the domestic violence movement are saying, no, you need to deal with the offenders. So I'm going to try to argue today that if your service plan for the non-offending woman is longer than your service plan for the offending male, something is seriously wrong in Denmark. And you really got to examine what's going on, both in your head and on the table. And we understand this. I have done a large number of failure to protect cases. I sat for several years until I couldn't take it anymore on the Child Fatality Review Board in New York and in New Jersey. I thought I had seen everything because I had worked with terrible cases of abuse for almost 50 years. But once I sat on that Child Fatality Review Board, I began to see things, imagine, go home at night thinking about our own children in ways that I had never thought before in terms of their vulnerability, my inability to protect them and so forth. And I had to leave the Child Fatality Review Board. So I can only project what it must be like on a daily basis to have this imagining whenever you go into a home or whenever you interview a client and see any kind of violence or anything else, imagine what is behind that. And even if you were to say rhetorically, as I do to myself repeatedly, that how can she be responsible? How can someone like Magdalena Luczek be responsible for Daniel's death when she reported rapes again and again and again by Marius to the police, and time after time, the 3 rapes that she reported to the police? In each case, he was given a community sentence, which meant basically he stayed in the house. He stayed in the house. And then she was excoriated for not reporting. She reported to domestic violence dozens of times, and again there were police visits. And the judge wondered, what did domestic violence have to do with this case anyway? I talked yesterday about a friend of mine who was murdered, a former police officer, and his wife were murdered, nothing to do with domestic violence. But the man who killed them was out on work release. See, this gesture is really something. You know, you watch it all day and all night, and you expect it to go up like that, but you watch it. The guy was out on work release because he was a nonviolent guy. The guy who killed the Greens. This is in Michigan. He was a nonviolent guy, according to the court, and that's why he was out on work release, and he killed him. And during his murder trial, don't you know, the sister, who was not allowed to say anything because it was on trial, she wasn't allowed to talk about what she knew, and she's a big researcher at Yale, a very close friend of mine, colleague, Laurie Post, and she couldn't say anything about the case, so she spent her time doing what she knows how to do, which was surveillance. She went down, back into his record, and she found 135 incidents against women of sexual assault, domestic violence, stalking, and 12 women came forward during the trials that over his 25 years he had physically abused, sexually abused, stalked, and so forth. And the prosecutor still said, what did the murder have to do with that? They still classified him as some kind of narcissistic personality rather than a chronically violent man, because these victims were virtually invisible, although they were in plain sight. So this is sort of, we're entering a complex world here, which we're going to talk about. But we're entering this world now with a new paradigm. This is one of our posters here in London. You may have seen it, but basically this reflects what we were told. In 1972, when the first woman and her 9-year-old daughter moved into our house, this was before we had refuges and shelters, and we were just hiding women in our homes. She had been living in a car with her child, her daughter, for about a week and a half, eating nothing but cold cereal. And I asked her directly, talk about the violence. I had worked with rape victims. I knew how difficult it was. So when she said to me, violence wasn't the worst part of it, I repeated, talk about the violence. And a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is how we moved, how I moved, and how the country moved from an understanding of abuse as domestic violence to the understanding that's embedded in the 2012 Home Office definition and the 2015 offense of domestic violence and coercive control. How do we learn to look beyond violence, to understand the subordination and the nature of oppression that women are experiencing? So how did we get here? Well, we got here because current approaches weren't working. That's certainly one thing. And because there wasn't a model on the scene. You know, the greatest model. The model of coercive control. And you can buy my book on Amazon. Or you can read much more legible, intelligible essays by Emma and others on the problem. But we had a new model. And it was a model that was adopted by the Council of Europe in 2011, Istanbul Convention, and there's a bill now after its third reading in Parliament that may be passed, leading England and Wales to adopt the Istanbul Convention, which has a very detailed, doesn't use the words coercive control, but it has a very similar definition coming from the UN, and it is a gender definition as opposed to the current definition. There were also a lot of grassroots folks like yourselves and the specialist services and other advocacy groups, ADA and other organizations, that were pressing for a new law and a new definition. And not just advocacy services, also the police, as we'll see in a minute, also the justice services, because they were as frustrated as those who represented victims with the existing approach. And so we got the new definition and the offense. But where did we start? We started with violence, and that's not surprising. I'm sure that's where all of us start. When I first opened the shelter, helped open a shelter in New Haven, one of the first in the United States, the appalling injuries that we saw made everything else pale in comparison. Oh, he called them names, he did it. Nothing seemed to approach the poster on Domestic Violence Month of the woman with the battered face, or on See Her Cry on the television, or what have you. Nothing approached that. And so it seemed natural to go from there into research. And where would you do research if you were looking at violence? You would go into the emergency room. So we started counting injuries in the emergency room. Thousands and thousands of injuries, and we did so, you have to remember, at a time when there was no definition of domestic violence, no diagnosis of domestic violence. Doctors didn't write down domestic violence. We were just starting shelters. It was even unethical to ask women about domestic violence because we couldn't help them. We had no services for them. And lo and behold, on the basis of our research, we found that domestic violence, shocked us all, was the leading cause of injury for which women sought medical attention, more common than auto accidents at the time, considered the most common cause of injury, rapes and muggings all combined. Amazing. We had no idea. 40% of all the injuries in the women that we studied in the hospital over time appeared on the records. They weren't all domestic violence injuries, but 40% of all the injuries appeared on the record of the 20% of the women coming to our hospital who were victims of domestic violence. It's amazing. And we tracked the fact that domestic violence victims were more likely to abuse alcohol 15 times, more likely to abuse drugs 9 times, more likely to be homeless many times, suicidality, HIV disease, depression, psychosis, and non-battered women. Are these multi-problem women who happen to get hit upside the head? Are they women who live in poverty and have so many problems of which domestic violence is one? Well, we wanted to know whether that was so. So we asked, were these women any different before the onset of abuse? And the answer, as you might expect, or I wouldn't be presenting it, is no.